2014 Norway chess tournament began in Stavanger today. It's the strongest tournament in the world so far this year, and among the 10 players it features the top 4 rated players in the world. Of course, the favourite is the world champion Magnus Carlsen, but in the first round he faced a difficult pairing. He was up against Anish Giri. Now he's just 19 years old and many see him as a future contender for the world title. Not an easy round for Magnus. For once, psychologically, the boot was on the other foot. We joined their game after 15 moves. Carlsen has the white pieces. Now it looks as though Giri has come out of the opening quite well. You can see this bishop just strikes across the board looking at this pawn. The rook is opposite the queen. If this knight moves, then there's some kind of discovered attack. It feels as though black is okay here. In fact, Carlsen came up with a very interesting idea. Of course, he'd anticipated this position. He tried knight g5. Well, there's a very crude threat to play queen takes pawn check. But curiously, black has problems defending against this move successfully. For example, if knight e5, then queen takes pawn. So the obvious move is pawn to e6. But this creates slight weaknesses on these squares, and this Carlsen managed to exploit. He played queen to c6, offering an exchange of queens. Giri exchanged. Now things are beginning to get more complicated because white has this far advanced passed pawn. If this is taken, then black has no difficulties at all. So Carlsen has to press on. Of course, he'd anticipated this. And now if the rooks are exchanged, then suddenly something nasty is going to happen here and white is going to win. So black has to play the rook to the side. Again, if this pawn is eliminated, then black has absolutely no difficulties. So somehow Carlsen has to hang on to that pawn. Now he did this by advancing this pawn. Now if the knight moves here, the rook comes down, protecting the pawn, and suddenly the knight is going to break through here. Great position for white. So first of all, Giri played this pawn up, and that forces the knight back. In fact, it's not a bad square in the centre of the board, but at least white won't be crashing in here. So now this knight in the middle has to move, and Carlsen achieves his aim, which is to bring the rook down to protect this pawn. Now if black doesn't react quickly here, then white is just going to win with rook here and rook down check. So knight b6 is a forced move, attacking the rook. If the rook goes back, then again rook takes pawn, fine for black. And if the rook steps to the side, then the bishop comes here. The rook is actually trapped. So Carlsen played the rook across here. So he's giving up his rook for a knight, but he manages to maintain this pawn on the 7th rank. Just one more square to go before it becomes a queen, and suddenly he has a threat to play his knight in to attack the rook here. Very dangerous. So this move is forced. The bishop not only protects the pawn but covers this square here, preventing the knight coming in. And now an excellent move from Carlsen. You can see that he's beginning to establish a grip on the position. It's so typical of his play. He likes to strangulate his opponents. He played his pawn up to c4. Now this prevents black advancing his own pawn, which would free his position. And it also opens up this diagonal, possibly for the bishop. Nice move. And you can see that Giri is running very short of moves here. He advanced his a pawn. So what he wants to do is bring his rook here to take this pawn. Now many people at this point thought that checking would be very strong. If the king comes up, now we can see this bishop It's looking at the king, and then suddenly there's going to be a discovered check, and the knight swings around here. Devastating. But black can play the king here. It looks deadly because there's a threat of mate. In fact, black survives with this move, and suddenly black has his freedom. It's very difficult to prevent the rook coming here, taking this pawn, and black should be alright here. It's a very tempting continuation for white, but Carlsen recognised not sufficient to win. Instead, he found knight c3, not an obvious move. Knight f6 is the obvious attacking move. Instead, Carlsen retreated. It's a brilliant idea. This was the game continuation. So he brings his knight to this square here, protecting the pawn and maintaining this terrible bind on black's position. At this point, I honestly thought that Carlsen was going to win. If he can advance his pawn here and play the knight in, then he can, if the knight is taken, he can always recapture with the pawn, get two protected passed pawns, must be winning. But there are many other ways to make progress, maybe just advancing the king to the queen side. Basically, black has to find a way to break free. This is what Giri did. Rook here. Now the pawn advances. So Carlsen ready to squeeze again with e5 and then move the knight in. The rook came to c8. Now black is threatening to play this move. Carlsen attacked the rook. The rook has to go back. The knight came back again. And they repeated the position. And here, because the position has been repeated 3 times, they agreed to a draw. Well, let's see what would happen if, in this position, white continued with his plan of pawn to e5. Black has this move. If the rook comes here, then black saves himself like this. Obviously, knight takes rook, rook takes rook. And what else? After rook e7, well, if the rook retreats, then black can return the exchange. And now, well, black doesn't have any difficulties at all, actually. And of course, white will recapture the pawn, and it probably will end in a draw, but no difficulties for black here at all. So this was a very clever way out for Giri. Afterwards, so they agreed to draw in this position. Afterwards, Giri said that he'd missed this move, knight c3, this retreat, and he only managed to draw, well, in his words, by a miracle. But draw he did, so good start for Anish Giri. In fact, there was only one decisive game today. Let's have a look at that one. Alexander Grishuk, rated number 3 in the world, against Fabiano Caruana, rated number 4 in the world. This was a wild game. You can see that white has a knight and 2 pawns for a rook. White has a really solid position. What he'd love to do is get his queen somehow round the back of black's position to attack the king. And you can see with all these pawns and the bishop and the knight, that gives white's king tremendous protection. So Grishuk, very short of time, he often gets into time pressure, played his queen here, so looking to get in here. Caruana blocked him out. Both players really short of time. They were banging out their moves. They had just seconds left. And here, probably Grishuk should play the queen over, and with best play, I think the position should be a draw. They should repeat moves. Instead, Grishuk played his queen here. Now, what's the difference? Let me show you. Black took here. Caruana took, and then played his rook to b2. And here, Grishuk resigned. If the queen moves, then queen takes pawn, and it's all over. Black breaks through to the king. A disaster for Alexander Grishuk. So, after the first round in Norway Chess 2014, Fabiano Caruana from Italy, leads with 1 point. All the other players on half a point, and Grishuk on 0. Still 8 rounds to go.